welcome to this explainer. Listen, today we are diving into some incredibly profound source material. And I've got to warn you up front, this is going to act as a massive high-energy wake-up call. Consider this a bit of an intervention, some tough love that's going to challenge literally everything you think you know about modern spirituality. If you've ever had that nagging feeling that your meditation practice, your weekend yoga retreats, or all that philosophical reading just isn't quite hitting the absolute core of your existence, well, you are exactly in the right place. We're going to strip away the illusions today and look at what true awareness actually demands from us.
Most people, even though they don't know it, are asleep. They never understand the loveliness and the beauty of this thing that we call human existence. That is a pretty harsh reality check from the spiritual teacher Anthony DeMello, right? He argues that we are born asleep, we live asleep, and we die asleep, never actually seeing the real beauty of human existence. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Are your spiritual practices actually waking you up, or are they just keeping you trapped in a really well-decorated, comfortable nightmare?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to cover 1. The modern spiritual void. 2. Escaping spiritual materialism. 3. The trap of spiritual bypassing. 4. Waking up to reality. And finally, 5. Surrender and the silent mind. I know these concepts can be a bit confronting, but don't worry, this roadmap will securely guide you through all these dense philosophical truths.
So, Section 1, the modern spiritual void, and how society actually engineered our disconnection.
You know, to really understand why we fall into these spiritual traps in the first place, we have to look at the root of our modern struggle. Society basically conditions us to constantly feed on the drug of approval, appreciation, and material success. And this disconnection, it's heavily driven by two dominant philosophies. First, you have positivism, championed by thinkers like Auguste Comte, which is the idea that empirical evidence is the only legitimate source of knowledge. Basically, if you can't measure it in a lab, it doesn't matter. And second, materialism, the belief that the physical world is all there is. Together, these frameworks completely reject the unseen, reducing human consciousness to nothing more than brain chemistry and leaving us feeling totally fragmented.
Think about it like this. On one side, we have our society's absolute obsession with observable facts, accumulating wealth, and these shiny external markers of success. On the other side, we have true spiritual fulfillment, the internal discovery of real peace, holistic integration, and a transcendent purpose. When we're told our whole lives that only the material world has value, it creates this massive existential emptiness inside of us. And because we so desperately want to fill that painful void, we end up stumbling blindly right into our next major trap.
Which brings us to Section 2, escaping spiritual materialism, or what is basically the ego's greatest disguise.
So we try to fill that modern void, right? And naturally, we often turn to spirituality. But according to Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa, our ego is incredibly clever, and it actually hijacks this entire process. He defines spiritual materialism as the self-deception of using spiritual techniques and disciplines to maintain and strengthen your egocentricity instead of dismantling it. Just pause and think about that for a second. We often use spirituality not to genuinely wake up, but to build a bigger, better, more spiritual ego. We end up just acting out the role of a spiritual person, rather than undergoing any actual real transformation.
Trungpa breaks this down into what he calls the three lords of materialism, to show us exactly how the ego defends its own solidity. It's fascinating. First is the lord of form. That's our neurotic pursuit of physical comfort and security, trying to avoid any sort of irritation. Second, the lord of speech, using our intellect and our ideologies to constantly categorize and control reality. But the most dangerous one is the third, the lord of mind. This rules when we use actual spiritual disciplines, like meditation, just to maintain our self-consciousness. It's the ultimate subversion of spirituality, turning the practice into just another achievement to stroke our own egos. And this brilliantly illustrates Trungpa's vivid metaphor for this trap, the antique shop of spiritual hoarding. Imagine a beautifully simple room with just one truly meaningful object in it. Now imagine filling that room with countless exotic philosophies, different yoga styles, and dozens of meditative techniques. Suddenly, you don't have a beautiful, peaceful room anymore. You just have a chaotic junk shop of the mind. We end up hoarding spiritual knowledge as shiny objects to display to the world, reassuring ourselves that we're so spiritual rather than actually tasting and experiencing the real truth.
Let's move to Section 3, the trap of spiritual bypassing. This is essentially avoidance in holy drag.
Identified by psychologist John Wellwood back in 1984, spiritual bypassing is using spiritual practices to avoid dealing with painful feelings, unresolved psychological wounds, and developmental needs. This is your classic feel-good New Age spirituality. It's forced positivity or constantly quoting concepts like The Secret as a way to just escape real-world problems. It's treating spirituality as a form of metaphysical Valium that completely numbs us to reality.
You can see the stark contrast here. Spiritual bypassing gives us this fake niceness, emotional numbing, and a whole lot of metaphysical Valium. Authentic spirituality, on the other hand, it demands that we face the fire. It requires staying grounded in our bodies and doing the really deep, messy, psycho-emotional work to heal our wounds. True spirituality doesn't separate us from our raw, messy humanity. It requires us to dive headfirst into it.
Let's take a breather for a second and just look at this powerful quote from Viktor Frankl. What gives light must endure burning. It's such a profound reminder that authentic spirituality is not a mellow buzz. It's not some protective bubble that shields you from life's fuss and fury. It is a vast, liberating fire. If we want the light of awareness, we absolutely cannot afford to flee the heat of our own pain and trauma.
All right, Section 4, Waking Up to Reality, the Tough Love of Transformation.
Look, right now, most of us are sleeping. We're hypnotized by society, constantly craving that drug of approval and doing whatever it takes to avoid pain. Anthony DeMello is very direct about this. Unlearning all of our societal programming and truly waking up is going to be highly uncomfortable. Why? Because we are nice and cozy in our bed of illusions. Waking up requires dropping your labels, losing your attachments, and observing reality exactly as it is without any of your ego's judgments. It's incredibly irritating at first, but it is the absolute only path to true healing.
So let this question pierce your ego's defenses for just a moment. Are you using spirituality to actually wake up, or are you just using it to sleep a little more comfortably? Are your practices just another clever way to avoid the hard, rugged truths of your life? It's a rhetorical question, sure, but it forces us to evaluate if we are genuinely pursuing truth or if we're just chasing comfort.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, Surrender and the Silent Mind, Stepping Out of the Ego's Bureaucracy.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the raw, rugged reality of true awareness, blending the wisdom of Trungpa and the philosopher J. Krishnamurti. Here's the practical application. Step 1. Let go of the how and the reward. If you're meditating just to get a reward, you're still trapped by the ego. Step 2. Acknowledge and surrender your raw, unpolished, even ugly ego. True surrender isn't about being saintly, it's landing on hard, rocky ground. And Step 3. Observe the mind without a controller. True meditation isn't a forced discipline or a mental gymnastics routine, it is simply letting things be.
Krishnamurti poses a fascinating concept about this third step. When you try to aggressively control your mind during meditation, who is actually doing the controlling? The controller is really just another fragment of your own thought. So, one fragment of thought is battling another fragment of thought. This just creates endless conflict and disorder, right? True order, he argues, comes from simply observing the disorder without trying to aggressively subdue it.
And when that internal conflict finally stops, we can achieve what Krishnamurti calls the silent mind. True meditation requires real psychological space. It requires freedom from constant mental occupation, freedom from the concept of time, and freedom from constantly measuring our own progress. When the mind is finally empty of the me, empty of its endless chattering, its attachments, and its past, it becomes completely silent. And only in that total silence can you perceive the immeasurable.
Anthony DeMello describes the ultimate goal of this awareness with such a beautiful, vivid metaphor. He says, it's like when you throw black paint in the air. The air remains uncontaminated. No matter what happens to you, you remain uncontaminated. That's the goal. When you are truly awake, you live fully in the real, messy world, yet you remain entirely at peace, uncontaminated by its honor, its disgrace, or its pain.
So, we'll leave you with this final provocative thought today. Are you just collecting spiritual antiques to decorate your ego, or are you genuinely ready to face the liberating fire and wake up? The path to true awareness isn't about feeling comfortable. It's about breaking out of your cage. Stop hoarding spiritual knowledge, stop bypassing your reality, and start living the rugged, real truth of awakening. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer.